Seventh round picks are often forgotten in the NFL draft. They're teams and players that just don't go very high for a reason. They very rarely make the NFL roster. And if they do, they are very often buried in the depth chart, never to see the light of day. The good ones turn into special teams aces or eventually even into rotational pieces. And the bad ones never get a chance to play professional football at all if they make the roster after the preseason. But the Detroit Lions are a bit of an anomaly in that way. Players like Chase Lucas and Jamar Jefferson had their roles on the Detroit Lions, and even sixth-round picks like Malcolm Rodriguez and James Houston saw short-term success and helped the Detroit Lions fortify their depth in the long term. And Dan Jackson will be no exception to that rule. The four-year safety with the University of Georgia started as a walk-on freshman and worked his way up the ladder to be a starting safety at Georgia, working his way to the NFL draft and eventually to the Detroit Lions. And in today's video, we're going to follow that career path, follow him in his journey to Detroit, and talk about what his role will be as a rookie safety for the Detroit Lions. Now, before we get into it, I do want to ask that if you have strong opinions of Dan Jackson, let me know down in the comments below. Grade the pick, A through F. Do you think it was a good pick, a bad pick? If there was somebody else you would have rather selected, let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on this as well. But with that being said, let's get into the long-term career of Dan Jackson, the Georgia safety. Now, Dan Jackson was a recruit in the 2019 season. He redshirted as a freshman and then did not play in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, meaning he didn't get a chance to see the field for Georgia until he was 2 years removed from his freshman redshirt season. In that freshman redshirt season, Dan Jackson was a good player for the Bulldogs, primarily a special teams guy playing in 15 games, seeing the Bulldogs go all the way to the national title game, winning their first national championship in a very, very long time. In that season, Dan Jackson played 15 games, had 4 starts, made 40 tackles and 2 tackles for loss, as well as a blocked kick on special teams. He was a versatile piece to be used on both the punt and kick return coverage teams and was a really good player, a head down, right, strong nose type of player that was not afraid to be physical, not afraid to make tackles. And Georgia recognized that. Kirby Smart saw that in the young walk-on redshirt freshman and started to give him more and more opportunities throughout the years. His sophomore campaign began even better than his freshman, playing in 7 games and starting 1, making 16 tackles, a tackle for loss, an interception, a pass defended, and a forced fumble. Unfortunately, his sophomore year would come to a conclusion slightly early. After a fractured foot sidelined him in a Week 7 contest, he did not return to action. He was on the bench and watched Georgia return as national contenders and national title winners in the 2022 season, but unfortunately, he wasn't able to contribute. But he came back next year with even larger aspirations and bigger goals. As a junior, he played in 11 games and made just a single start. With 20 tackles, another interception, a PBU, and a forced fumble, it was undeniable that he would eventually find his way into the starting rotation, and that's exactly what happened in his senior year. In 2024, Dan Jackson took a massive step forward for the Bulldogs. As a senior redshirt player and a former walk-on, he was named not only a starter, but a team captain and even a third-team All-SEC defender. In 13 starts, Dan Jackson totaled 64 tackles, a tackle and a half for loss, 2 interceptions, 3 passes defended, as well as another blocked kick and a forced fumble. He is a player that puts his head down, works hard, and finally saw all that hard work pay off for the Georgia Bulldogs. That led him to being a late round safety in the NFL draft. No one expected him to be a day 1 or a day 2 prospect, but he did expect to hear his name be called. And in the 7th round on day 3 of the NFL draft, that is exactly what happened. Brad Holmes made the call, introduced him to the head coach, introduced him to the owner, and asked him if he was ready to be a Detroit Lion. Now, what are the pros and cons of this pick? Because as much as we can talk about his story at Georgia, that's all in the past. What is he going to do now for the Detroit Lions? Well, he is a physical player. He has good size at 6'2", 200 pounds. He has great special teams value, as we talked about, primarily a special teams player at Georgia, blocked multiple kicks, and even when he was asked to play safety, he was pretty impactful, had a number of interceptions, had some PBUs, but I think the biggest strength he has as a safety is in the run support. He is a mean, hard-nosed safety that is not afraid to put his head on the football, not afraid to create some contact, and he's not afraid to lay the lumber at college football or even in the SEC. Dan Jackson is not a coverage safety. He doesn't have the NFL tools that you would expect from an NFL safety, but that's okay, right? He is 6'2". He's got good length, but he doesn't really have the speed to be an NFL safety, doesn't really have the range to be an NFL safety, doesn't really have the instincts necessarily to make up for those things, but he is a good enough football player to run down the field on special teams, to make hits, to make tackles, to go be a special teams ace. And he is a good enough leader and a hard enough worker that will stand out to the Detroit Lions through the preseason. He will get opportunities at safety in the preseason. He will get a chance to play in the Hall of Fame game and all 3 preseason games after that. But the reality is he probably won't play safety in the NFL. His value is almost entirely a special teams type of player, which is not a bad thing. There are Hall of Fame level players that were solely special teams contributors, right? Devin Hester was a second round pick, but really didn't contribute a whole lot on offense, is almost entirely based off special teams value. Matthew Slater is a 6-time All-Pro for the Patriots without ever really playing the wide receiver position and almost solely being a gunner on special teams. Those players have roles, and the players that can fill those roles really well are the ones that play 5, 6, 7, 10 years in the NFL. And even if they finish their career with less than 100 tackles, no TFLs, no interceptions, no, passes defended, those players still have successful careers. And I think that is the career trajectory that Dan Jackson is currently on. I don't think Dan Jackson will ever amount to being even the 3rd safety for the Detroit Lions. I don't think he has the range or the instincts necessarily to fully become a reliable player in the secondary. I think that role is still up to be determined. I think they really like Maurice Norris. I think they really like a guy like Lawrence Strickland, but I do think value will still be there. I do think Dan Jackson will make the roster. I think it'll be one of those questionable decisions at the time of, why are we keeping this player if he's not going to play on defense? But I do think it will pay off on the special teams. A great gunner, a great tackler, a hard-nosed player, a team captain. And this is a player that could turn out to be the next CJ Moore, the player that could turn out to be the next Jalen Reeves-Maybin, a player that could turn out to be the next Miles Killebrew, right? A player that probably won't play a lot of defense, but will be really impactful for the team nonetheless and will eventually turn out to be a fan favorite. I give this pick a B overall. It is a 7th round pick, so it's a little tough to judge the value. Any value you get out of Dan Jackson is kind of gravy on top of the draft class, right? If he works out, even if he's a special teams player that totals 7 to 10 tackles a season on special teams, that's value in the 7th round. And that just kind of is the reality. I think he brings that special teams value, brings that special teams ace quality that you really want in a player, but probably will not amount to anything else. So a 7th round pick bringing value gives it a B+ in my opinion. But obviously let me know down in the comments below. What do you think about Dan Jackson? Do you think he's a good football player, or do you think he's destined to be released with the depth the Lions have? I go back and forth on it, but I do think he has enough value to stick around. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Dan Jackson, hard worker, a player that worked his way up through the Georgia depth chart over the last half a decade, went through some struggles, went through some trials and tribulations, but eventually found his way into a successful role. Worked his way up through Georgia, worked his way to the NFL draft, and now has the opportunity to make an NFL roster in the preseason. The Detroit Lions safety room, pretty good. You have Kerby Joseph, who's an All-Pro, Brian Branch, who's a Pro Bowler, but behind that, it's wide open. Maurice Norris played in the playoff game, but played very little throughout the rest of the regular season. Lawrence Strickland made the roster, but didn't see a single defensive snap on the year. And other than that, it's pretty wide open. There are no real contenders for safety 3 at this point. So who knows? If he stands out in the preseason, maybe he beats out Brandon Joseph. If he stands out in the preseason, maybe he beats out a guy like Lawrence Strickland. Maybe he beats out a guy like Maurice Norris. Maybe he does find a way to get reps as a safety 3. He's defied the odds before as a redshirt freshman, walk on to play all the way up through his senior year. So who's to say that he couldn't do it again? But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Once again, let me know down in the comments below what you think about Dan Jackson as a safety. And let me know in the comments, what players do you want to see next? Of course, we'll do Dominic Lovett tomorrow and talk about him as a wide receiver from Georgia. But when we go into undrafted free agents, who do you want to hear about? What players do you think have a chance to make the roster? And exactly what do you expect from this draft class? I'd be really curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.